Okay, as I mentioned, we are going to kind of continue on in the book of Colossians. I guess that's been what I've been doing somewhat informally on our Wednesday nights when I have the privilege to cover for Steve, who you guys are going to be traveling soon, right? And so we will miss you, but of course enjoy yourself as you travel and enjoy that time. Over in Colossians 2, verse 8 through 15, and I'll go ahead and read that. And for sake of time, I was going to do the same thing that Steve does and have you guys, point out any words or things that stand out to you. But just since we got a little bit of a late start, let me just go right ahead here. But Colossians 2, verses 8 through 15. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. And you have been filled in him who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh, by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. Now, this is yet another way that Paul addresses the core central theme of Colossians, which is the supremacy of Christ. You just got to keep talking about how glorious and wonderful Jesus is. He already did that in chapter 1, and you think, oh, I get it, Paul. You got a high view of who Christ is. But he's going to hit that theme again, and this time in the context of a warning. In verse 6, if you remember from last time, if you're here, there was a therefore, as you receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. So there was this command that as high a view as you have of Jesus, you now need to go walk and live that out. And then he's going to point out two warnings for us. First is there to see to it that no one takes you captive, right? And then in verse 16, therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink. So he's going to give two warnings. Like you are supposed to walk in a way that is honoring to the Lord and that shows that Christ is supreme. But here's going to be two areas of your life that you need to watch out. It's this one of being taken captive by human traditions and so on. And then the other is sort of in the practice of Christian living. So you could say one is a thought life thing, and one is a living your life sort of thing. So in your thought life, you must have Christ as supreme, but there are dangers and there's warnings that you must heed. Now, what's funny is, of course, he's going to give you a verse. Verse 8 is going to be the warning. And then he's going to go on for several verses about the supremacy of Christ again. So it's like, let me just warn you about people that are going to distract you from the supremacy of Christ. And I'm going to warn you by reminding you of the supremacy of Christ. So on the one hand, I'm going to spend a little bit of time today on the warning part, more almost than Paul does, and you need to be warned. But really the solution to so much of the error and deception and the wrong thinking out there, because if you start listing, what are the different philosophies out there? What are the different empty human traditions and philosophies of man out there? Oh, there's a big old list. But what really do I need to communicate to you is how to have a good apologetic response to, say, Mormonism or to Stoicism or to Buddhism, and go down like this innumerable list of all the wonky ways that human beings have tried to reject God, or just paint the picture of Christ for you again. of how glorious and wonderful he is. So let me warn you first, as Paul does, and then it's just even reading it, I'm thinking, how can I move past, in him, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily? Am I going to even get past that point in the supremacy of Christ? We'll see. Time will tell. But the warning first. Be careful of those who would dismiss or distract you from the supremacy of Christ. And the first warning is, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So here the danger is represented as a person. And this person is literally a kidnapper, right? See to it that no one takes you captive. So it's the idea that we are to watch out for human traffickers, like real ones who would do this abominable thing, kidnap and sell people or whatever. But we should also be very, very mindful, and probably more practically so, be worried about those every day who are trying to kidnap you into their way of thinking. That they're out there prowling around, trying to deceive you, trying to capture you, right? And one of the worst thoughts I have is if someone were to try and kidnap my kid, right? That's such a terrible, terrifying thought, that someone would do that. And you hear the horror stories of people who spend their life wondering if their kid's still alive. That is one of the worst tortures I could imagine for a parent. But woe to me if I'm not also, so I got to prepare my kids by saying, watch out for strangers. If someone does, grabs you and whatever, you got to scream, you got to fight. You don't let them just take you. All that stuff. I train them, I teach them, I talk to them about this. But woe to me if I don't also warn them about the world, about the deceits and the philosophies of the world. So it's that language very much so of kidnapping. And we all need to watch out for this. Watch out for the one, then, who would use philosophy and empty deceit to capture you. Now, to love wisdom, literally philosophy is made up of two words, philos, which is love, and sophos, which is wisdom. So what's a philosopher? Someone who loves wisdom. Does that sound like such a bad thing? Well, of course not. Well, you think if it's godly wisdom, no problem there. You have the entire book of Proverbs, right? It's a book of wisdom. But what's the key ingredient to the kind of wisdom that is described in Proverbs? And maybe you don't even need to turn there, but there's a line that's used frequently there and other places in the Bible. What is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge. Proverbs 4:7 says, the beginning of... Proverbs 1:7, I'm sorry. Proverbs 1:7, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And then Proverbs 3:13 says, blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. Be a lover of wisdom. Be a philosopher in that sense. And then Proverbs 4:7, that's why I noted this. I love this. The beginning of wisdom is this. Get wisdom. And whatever you get insight.
A circular reasoning thing
yes. It's a truism, right? The beginning of wisdom is to want to get wisdom. And what's the key to wisdom? The fear of Yahweh. So what's he really saying? He's saying the beginning of wisdom is to fear the Lord. I mean, you could say it like that. So obviously that kind of wisdom is to be sought after and pursued over and over again. And we'll talk in a minute about why fearing God is the beginning of wisdom. But of course, when we talk about Colossians 2 and the context that he's writing, this is like a post-Greek world because the Romans are in charge. But if you remember those big names like Socrates and Plato and all those guys, that's like a few hundred years before Paul's writing. But in that time, certainly the idea like philosophy as like this discipline has multiplied and grown, and you'd often have a situation situations like you read in Acts where people would gather together to hear philosophers speak and just talk about wisdom and talk about, how the world works and how we should live in it. The problem is, those men were not trying to seek godly wisdom. They weren't seeking that wisdom out of fear of the Lord. And so philosophy at the time that Paul was writing, it had to do with theories about God and the world and life and religion, but they were theories deprived of Yahweh and what he had given to us in his word. So it was the core of it empty and hollow, chasing after the wind. Sometimes philosophers would argue just to argue. If you've ever done that before. This is what I did in college all the time. I argued with my friend for an entire night about whether his hair was curly or wavy. Stupid, right? But that's what you do when you're in college. You just, we didn't have TV at the time. You just sit there and argue. We argued about if you were thrown out into space from a space shuttle, would you explode or would you just, implode, right? And we'd argue about this. This is before we had Google. That's what you did. You just talked about stuff, and you try to use your logic and think about that. And that's silliness. But in a way, that's what Paul is saying. Everything is reduced. Everything is as silly as that. Plato and Socrates and all these, wonderful scholars, brilliant men. Yet if you're apart from the Lord seeking wisdom, you might as well be arguing about whether your buddy's hair is curly or wavy. What a silly discussion we've had. And that's exactly what was happening at the Areopagus in Acts 17 when Paul stands up on Mars Hill and starts to tell all these philosophers about the Lord. But for another thing, so that kind of ego-driven, or just I'm just doing it because I want to win an argument with someone, that's all pride, and that's all hollow, that's all vain. But for another thing, so that's why it's empty, another thing, that kind of worldly philosophy, as wise as it is, it cannot touch the mind of God. It cannot touch the mind of God because God's wisdom makes our wisdom foolish. Listen to 1 Corinthians 1:18. This is a humbling passage on wisdom. 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles, but to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. See, at the core of it, at the core of God's wisdom is something that is so upside down from our wisdom that you could never possibly reach it. There's no one who ever conceived or devised of this thought of justification by faith through the substitutionary death of God himself who became a man. That is so upside down to say, we have a problem that we cannot attain to deity. No man ever dared to say, well, you know what should happen is that God should love us enough to himself come down here as a man, live perfectly, be unjustly accused of all the bad, nasty stuff we do, to shamefully be accused by man, stripped and beaten by man, by sinful man, and then killed, crucified, murdered on a cross by man, and through that save man and forgive their sins. See, that's preposterous. No human being ever would dare to think something as ridiculous. Even people who are atheists, they're not going to come up with that idea or that concept, right? This, like, Christianity is saying something very different compared to all the religions. Go ahead and look, go look at the thousands and myriads of worldviews and see if anyone would dare to say something so foolish. And yet, that foolishness, which you would never accuse God of doing, like, who is going to stand up to God with that plan of salvation? God himself did. So that is why it's such an empty pursuit, man's wisdom, because it would not have dared ever to think of such a daring, upside down, almost blasphemous plan. You see, if you'd come up with that plan, it'd be blasphemous, but for God to come up with it, it's glorious. And so this is just another, ultimately, wisdom and truth then is revealed by the Spirit of God. And it reveals that wisdom is not attained by the pursuit of man, but God's pursuit of man. So it is never that through wisdom you will attain and get to God. True wisdom is that God has pursued us. And that's what we see in the next chapter of 1 Corinthians here. Yet among the mature, this is 1 Corinthians 2:6, yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it's not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age, who are doomed to pass away. But we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would have not crucified the Lord of glory. It's like they would not have done that. They wouldn't even conceive to do this. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. So God has to reveal it, because God is the one who pursues us. God is the one who came up with the plan of redemption. So, of course, the pursuits of man and philosophy, it's all going to come up hollow and empty and dry. So, why does worldly wisdom sound so good and interesting? Why do I, I just saw a brief video. This is a very, very famous YouTuber. He follows a philosophy, Diogenes, who's a Greek philosopher who's like, who was very held in high regard, but the height and pinnacle of his wisdom is, I don't need anything. So famously, and this might be just legend, he lived in like a barrel, naked, and all he owned was a bowl. And then he realized when he saw like some animal like scooping water, or a boy scooping water with his hand, he's like, I'm a fool. I don't even need the bowl. That's Diogenes, like in a nutshell, right? Like, this is the pinnacle to this guy who's like a very influential YouTuber, right? He's like, I know, he doesn't even live like that, but then like he's very enamored of it. Now, this is a guy who's like a millionaire, probably tens of millionaires, right? And he's living life, as he wants, but he's like, I realize I only need one pair of shoes, right? Well, he doesn't want to go all the way, but it's like, it's a bowl, the shoes are a bowl, the computer's a bowl, the sofa's a bowl. I only need one, right? But then do I need any of it? Well, makes YouTube videos, so he needs at least one camera, at least one computer. It breaks down. So you see the irony of that, right? Like, he's very enamored of this worldly philosopher. He thinks this guy's attained by being naked in a barrel with not even a bowl. He doesn't even live that out himself. Why is that so appealing to him? I'm just curious. Why do you think that's appealing to people? That kind of thought.
To me.
Right. What?
I think it's sort of like, it's all about self. He's trying to like make everyone self-righteousness, like, hey, look at me. Like, this is allocating some sort of status where I want to make myself so great. So it kind of lets everyone know that, he wants to let everyone know I have attained or reached a certain point where I don't need anything in life, and he wants to draw attention to himself.
Well, you can tell he's frustrated by the fact that he lives fairly lavishly, right?
It hasn't fulfilled him.
Right. And he would like to, he idolizes this philosopher, right? But he's married, he's got a kid. Is he going to make them all live in a barrel? and not even have a bowl? So why is he enamored of this? Even though it's empty, even for him, he's not even pursuing it. Like, that's, what is the appeal? I'm sorry, Nelson, you're going to say something.
I think there's a couple of things. It can either be escapism, because there's a certain level of responsibility that I think Christ bestows upon us to be tertiary here and not exonerate ourselves from the responsibility we have, i.e. as kid or perhaps an alien parent or whatever it may be. But the appeal is that there is a certain simplification that you're able to have one relationship with the Lord, right, which is torn down. And I think we all deal with it every day. It's like, how can I disrobe all the things that are the trappings that interrupts me in my relationship with the Lord? I think that's what the appeal is, right?
So, and he's not a Christian at all. I don't know. He's never revealed any kind of spiritual background.
Yeah,
but yeah.
and that's the case, and it's truly like escapism, right? Like it's like I just want to simplify it, and then I think without the Lord it becomes a selfish endeavor.
Well, on top of that, he's a YouTube influencer. That's all.
No, and I'll say like he's pretty famous. I mean, it's if you know, the name is PewDiePie, which he was the #1 highest subscribed YouTuber for a while, and he walked away from it for the most part. Like, he used to post all the time. Now he barely does. But I just thought it was funny. The last one he did is like. He idolizes Diogenes, and yet, it's not the life he lives. Not even close. Not even close to that. What is the appeal? Hold on to that thought. Like, why is that appealing? And what is this? What would we say to someone like that, right? So just think about that for a second. Now, the idea of this emptiness and empty deceit there, captive by philosophy and empty deceit, and those are kind of meant to be redundant terms. So again, like, loving wisdom is not a bad thing. Philosophy, though, we're defining a certain way as the ways mankind tries to think of how to live and who God is and who they are apart from God. And for that, yes, it's empty deceit. Well, who else talked about and wrote about empty pursuits and vain desires? Yeah, Solomon. So it's not as if even, in a sense, like this Diogenes guy, right? Like, he found some kind of freedom in being like beneath it all and above it all. So like, famously, he would, he didn't care who was passing by. It could be a nobleman or a poor person, and he could insult you, and he felt free to do so. Right? Because he had no sense of being tied to anyone or anything. So there's kind of freedom there, right? And that might be part of the answer. Like, why live like that? Because what can a person take away from you if you have nothing? So like a king or something threatens you. Like, I got nothing. I live naked in a barrel, and what are you going to do to me? You're going to kill me? Well, go ahead. What do you gain from that? I'm nobody. I'm a guy who lives in a barrel. That sort of thing. But Solomon writes about that emptiness in Ecclesiastes, and he describes all the vain ways that people try to fill their life with meaning or satisfaction, only to be left wanting more. So in a worldly sense, what's the conclusion of that? If every pursuit on this earth, apart from God, leaves you empty, it's vain. That's the line, right? Vanity of vanities, like chasing after the wind. Solomon is kind of coming to the same conclusion as Diogenes. So it's not as if Diogenes is really thinking up anything particularly earth-shattering. It's already sort of there. Like, Solomon's already said, yeah, if you think about it, under the sun, if you pursue anything, there's a certain chasing after the wind aspect to it. So it's going to feel empty and be empty. And maybe the conclusion is, then why have anything? Well, great. Or maybe you get the opposite conclusion. Then I'll amass everything. You see, on Diogenes' worldview, why is there any distinction or difference if there's no God? Whether you go disavow everything, all relationships and possessions, or you say, well, I'm going to max everything. I'm going to, schmooze and be as popular with many people as possible and own everything I can. There's no difference. And that's almost what Solomon's saying. It's all vanity. It all equals zero. So you do whatever you want. Under the sun, it's all equivalent. Yeah, Victor.
So let's say Lynn knows about what I wrote in my writing class, but really I had prompts to make me think about, like, a few prompts. First question, first writing prompt was, what did you learn when you were 18? Like, what would you tell yourself when you're 18 now? Or what did you wish you learned when you were 18? And then the next question, writing prompt was, what's your greatest possession? With those two writing prompts, I literally boiled down to like, I don't care about, like, first of all, my answer on the first assignment was, it's like, I wish I knew the value of time because I was like wasting time when I was young. And then the second, the greatest possession, besides not being able to write about salvation is the greatest possession I have. I wrote about how, literally the first sentence was, I care less about material goods, material things, and then what my greatest possession is immaterial. So I started basically bringing up the gospel, and like, not the gospel, like things like this, things you cannot even put a value or you can even name. You're talking about like this, this immaterial, anything with immaterial, you're dealing with like, compassion, things that you just, I mean, like human value, like interactions, or that's a feeling that you cannot even place a value on something. You can't put a dollar amount to something that you have, that you possess, immaterial, right? I mean, like, you can't say the value of even time.
I think, yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I didn't know if there was yes. I think.
I mean, one person wrote out, this is an heirloom passed down like 5 generations. Like, I don't really care because at the very end, like, that all that stuff is going to be like burned up or taken to the dump according to one of your sermons you had years ago. I remember that. I literally threw that in.
I took that from Andy Alcorn, so yeah. Again, not to interrupt you too much, but just I don't want to go too far down that rabbit trail. So Solomon writes, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. And some people call this is Ecclesiastes 3:11, kind of the God-shaped hole passage, where there is a vanity and a pointlessness to trying to fill a God-shaped hole with anything other than God, right? That's a vain pursuit to try and fill a God-shaped hole in your heart, which only God can fill. And so that's another sense in which we're talking about empty deceits in Colossians, is that, anytime people try to fill their life with even family or things that seem like good things, but apart from the Lord, it's never going to fill it up. It's just an endless hole and pit where you keep throwing stuff into it, but it never gets filled up. So that is a warning to us. Now, it seems so obvious that it's a pit, right? How could you possibly be taken captive then by philosophy and empty deceits? But there's two kinds of appeals to it. Because they come from something. And it comes from human traditions, and it comes from what Paul says, or ESV translates, elemental spirits of the world. So they're products of a worship, I would say, of either man or the creation. In other words, the supremacy of humanity or the supremacy of the universe, instead of the supremacy of Christ. So philosophy and empty deceits, which can take you guys captive, it's coming from, and usually a combination of human traditions, or let's call it a worship of creation. And those are appealing. Those are appealing because, well, on the one side, it might seem like, well, Diogenes was a fool. But you know what? He had followers, ironically, and he didn't care. Right? It's so funny. People wanted to be like him. He said, I don't care. Famous people would come to him. Oh, let me learn from you. I don't care. But there's a certain appeal and a certain even threat that comes from human tradition. Human tradition, that is to say, let's look at human history and see the kind of principles that constantly come with our existence. We're not going to literally do that, but you just think of what we have records of the rise and fall of nations, of even just think, if you're older, just think of like your own family and the drama that has unfolded, or think of, American society, right? You just go back any amount of time and you can make observations about humanity, because we tend to do the same things over and over again. And always we see this demonstration, sometimes of the goodness of God and the grace of God, where there's sacrifice and heroism. But so often, like, why is sacrifice and heroism necessary? Why is, some of the great acts of valor, say in World War II, necessary? Because there's great evil. Humanity does great evil, right? Like, you have these acts of great sacrifice and heroism because there's someone doing something super awful that needs to be addressed with those acts of heroism and self-sacrifice. If you reject God as supreme, well, then who is supreme? Man is. And man has demonstrated they do so many horrible things to other men. That is the legacy and the tradition that we see. Now, that gets formalized. When you say human tradition here, we mean formalized ways that humanity has enshrined our rebelliousness or selfishness or sinfulness. Now, I think of like traditions like Christmas traditions or Thanksgiving traditions. So I suppose like you can think in that way, but we're probably thinking more here in terms of like bigger picture practices and norms, things where those traditions have been enshrined into like a system. So you think of governments, you think of religions, you think of cultures and societies, you think of great movements, you think of the Mongolian hordes. You think of like just swaths where when you were a Viking, what was the tradition? What was normative? Well, Vikings are going to be like, that's not all we did, but allow me the broad brushing. But what was tradition? You rape and pillage, right? You burn, rape, and pillage. There's a tradition we have that we do, right? Like, okay. And so you've enshrined, burning, raping, and pillaging. But you can go through, and we don't need to go through every form of oppression, every form of superstition, every form of ism, whether that's communism, capitalism, Buddhism, any of those isms. All of these systemized traditions, practices, norms, political systems, the human existence, the pattern of human existence is so often repeated across the globe and across time. Again, I mean, just think in your own head. What problems do you see now that do you not think was not also a problem in the past, right? In terms of human nature.
It's all the same.
Yeah, it's all the same stuff. Greed, pride, ego, lust. Like, it's just, we don't change. Now, we have better ways to do that. We have better ways to kill each other. We have better ways to spread, evil and illicit stuff. We're good at it now. We've got lots of technology to help us do it better, but it's the same stuff that was in our hearts. Of course, in Jesus' day, he frequently pointed out the religious traditions of the Pharisees, which had become, of course, its own religion. Was it Judaism anymore? No, it was Pharisaical law-keeping. It was its own tradition. And so you followed the traditions of men as if they were the words of God, and he would constantly point that out to them. And they had enshrined sinful attitudes into a culture that everyone just went along with. They were born into it. How deceptive and how wicked that is. And so the thing is, the compulsion to conform is very high. So say you're in the Viking era and you're like, I'm not really that invested in raping and pillaging and burning, but the culture pressure is pretty high to do that. You're going to look at it as weird if you don't. Again, I know I'm broad brushing here, but you can just say that for any kind of cultural thing. You think about the kids now, like what's normal for them is you got to have a social media. You got to be posting selfies and doing all that. That's all cultural pressure thing. Like there's a high degree of compulsion for us to not go against the flow, to not be oppressed by others, to not stand out from the norm, all those things. And so you think, why do people sometimes go along with deceptions and philosophies? Sometimes it's just because they don't want to stick out. Sometimes they just don't want to be looked at as weird. I know we all want to think that we're the punk rebel and we do things differently than everybody else. And yeah, there's people like that. You get a Diogenes once in a while. But think about it. Diogenes had a following of people that wanted to be like him. And imagine you're in the Diogenes club, okay? And you bought yourself a bowl, right? A nicer bowl than the other guy had, before they got rid of all their bowls. And then what would they do? And again, I'm kind of using a little bit of imagination here. Like, they say, hey, you can't be a part of this club with that kind of bowl. Like, so even in like those rebellious groups, like you don't think punk people gatekeep and say, no, you're not punk rock enough. You're not rebellious enough. You don't think like anarchists are like, hold on, it's not that kind of anarchy, man. It's this kind of anarchy, right? Like the desire for humanity to want to like conform and not stick out, to live in fear of man, human traditions, very high. And so that's why people fall into that. You might say, like, again, philosophy, who wants to be taken captive by all this junk? But we do. Because if everyone else is doing it, maybe I don't want to stand out. No one really truly wants to, very few people really truly want to stand alone. They want to stand alone together with other people that are standing alone the same way that they are. Really, really. Unless like you're just, disconnected from reality. On the other hand, you have, and this is similar, if you're not going to worship Christ and you're not going to worship man, you know what people tend to do? Is they worship the creation. So here, when it says, according to the elemental spirits of the world, that's a tricky passage. I'm interpreting it one way. I'm just telling you up front that you might find other interpretations. Literally, this is something like the ABCs, literally like elementary school thinking. So some people say that this is like according to just like basic, immature, childlike thinking. I don't know if I take it that way. I think this is talking about like the elemental principles. If you, in the ESV, that's an alternative translation to elemental spirits, elemental principles. In other words, that this is talking about the worship of the natural world, seeing the universe as its own means and ends. A worship of the creation, in other words. That if you don't hold Christ as supreme, what else do you hold supreme? Yourself? Maybe the world, the universe as its own thing. Of course, this has been very popular, and since the Enlightenment and since so many scientific discoveries, it's like, well, we can explain everything through microscopes and telescopes and measuring and experiments in labs. But that's not true. What you end up seeing is a blindness, an emptiness, and a deceit. The same way when you blindly have an allegiance to science and logic. Carl Sagan, he said, the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself, because we're part of the cosmos. The cosmos, if I'm the cosmos, then that's the cosmos. The cosmos is knowing about the cosmos through the cosmos. Oh, that sounds all fine and good and heady, and wow, that sounds really like deep. That's just pagan idol worship, the kind that was, prophesied by God, that we fall into. Like, do you think the Canaanites, when they chopped down a tree and carved it into an Asherah pole, or they took some gold or silver and melted it and fashioned it to an idol, that's like that much worse than Carl Sagan saying, oh, we are star stuff, and we are the way the cosmos knows the cosmos? Man, it's the same thing. It's very similar. I think of this other quote from him. And this betrays something. I don't think he realizes it. He says, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. I think he's admitting something there he doesn't realize he's admitting.
Yeah.
Right? How do you make an apple pie? Well, of course, the idea is like if you give a mouse a cookie kind of logic. Like, well, an apple pie is made up like flour, sugar, apples. So where does the apples come from? A tree. Well, where did that tree come from? A seed. Where did the seed come from? And you keep going back and back. And at a certain point with anything, you get back to the beginning of the universe. You got to invent the universe. Well, buddy, If the universe is, was, and always is, what do you mean? How do you just get the universe as a given? You don't get the universe as a given. You got to explain that too. Why do you stop there? If you stop there, you're just worshiping the universe. In essence, part of the necessity, I'll say the necessity of believing in God is this fundamental inability to understand existence apart from it. I cannot understand existence, really. I can't make sense of the fact that there's, existence. That's such a hard thing to wrap your mind around. But you don't have many options. If the universe itself is at its core meaningless and purposeless, which is what Carl Sagan says, and yet at the same time he romanticizes it. He's in love with it. Oh, the universe is so cold and unfeeling and purposeless and meaningless, but here I am, a part of it. I'm part of that, and I have meaning and purpose and love and all these things. Well, I don't get it. How can a cold, purposeless, meaningless universe create a being? If you're part of the cosmos, you're part of the universe, then you're saying the universe is loving and caring and can be in awe of things. You can't have it both ways. I know that might be like a little bit of a weird thought, and if that's confusing to you, don't worry about it. But he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. He's trying to have his apple pie and eat it too. See it that way. No, this is vanity. This is just one step above, if you want to even say that, of creating an idol from a piece of wood or gold and worshiping it as God. He's just like one tiny step above that. Oh, how much humanity has changed in 4,000 years, I guess, from the Canaanites to Carl Sagan. Not that much different at all. That's what you're going to do, though. If you don't hold to the supremacy of Christ, you will hold to the supremacy of man or the supremacy of the universe or the creation. And that has not changed. Hardly one iota from Moses warning the Israelites, when you go into that land, there are going to be a bunch of pagan worshipers and they're going to make idols. Don't do it. Don't fall into that trap of worshiping mute, deaf, dumb idols. Carl Sagan worships a deaf, dumb, mute universe.
He's just dressed up in pretty clothes.
Yeah. He's written poetry about it, essentially. Like his.
Still alive?
No, he passed away.
When did he die?
I think before the thousands, but you have
Did he
to.
become a believer?
I don't think so. And I will say some of his quotes truly are beautiful. Like in terms of poetry, it's beautiful stuff he says. It's just, he is so in love with the universe. And it's exactly the kind of love
With Jesus?
that he could, if he just showed it to God, the creator of it, you'd be there, right? And what's the incentive, you might say? The incentive for human tradition is you get along with everybody, I'm part of the group, I'm not standing out and all that. What's the incentive to worship the universe? Well, because I will at the least say it's like very impressive, the stars, they're pretty amazing. The water cycle, that's pretty incredible. Liquid water on this planet, if you know anything about the solar system and like all the galaxies, that's very unique. Sunsets, beautiful. The universe is pretty awesome. I get it. And that's why God says, Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. It's intended to point us. Us, amazing image bearers of God. Each human being, what should it point us to? God. Same way as the creation is supposed to point us to God. But in our sinfulness, we stop there. We glorify man, glorify the universe. Though the heavens declare the glory of God, though we're made in the image of God. That's the folly of it. That's the foolishness. And yet we fall into that. We get taken captive by that. We get impressed by things humans can do and human achievement and accomplishment and tradition. We get enamored. I love watching science videos. I love physics stuff. It's typically above my head. But I love thinking like there's all these crazy things going on in the world of physics that I defy almost explanation and logic. I love that stuff. But every single one of it should humble us and say, but God, then, is so much greater and so much more wonderful. That's why the first thing he says, not according to Christ, so Christ is the contrast. He says, for in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. And I'm not even going to preach the whole another sermon on that, only for you to think about that concept of all of that God is. It also came to us in all that we are, not with our sin, but in our flesh, that he is uniting in the wisdom of God, which you cannot possibly fathom, which we cannot comprehend, Jesus Christ, fully, truly God, fully, truly man, in one who walked this earth. That is the answer. I mean, just stop there. If that is what Christianity is claiming, that is what unites all of this. Why am I so enamored of the universe? God made it. Why am I so enamored of man and our achievements? Because we communicate his image. So why is Jesus so good and glorious? He's the creator of the universe and us. And he also entered into this sinful world, and yet without sin, he knows my temptations, he knows my weaknesses, and he lived perfectly in this life as God would want. That's the answer. Even if that alone, he's going to go on, we're going to talk about that next time, he's going to go on, but boy, how could you not at least be compelled by that? I think that stands head and shoulders above every other philosophy and empty deceit out there. The deity and the humanity of Jesus Christ. And of course, what gets entailed is that why did he become a man? It's so that he could live a perfect life, so he could die for our sins, so he could accomplish the redemption for us, to redeem not just us, but the whole world and the universe, to wipe away every tear, to restore all that was broken. Everything else is entailed in that. So that whole story, it sounds so much better than anything else the world has to offer. And to say, this is yours by the grace and gift of a loving God. No strings attached except for the humility to admit that you need it. That's all that's required, is the humility to say you need the grace that he offers. And to acknowledge it, right? To truly acknowledge it. Not to just know it. The demons know it, but they don't have the humility, and they can't, to say, I'm a sinner that needs that kind of grace. That's all that's required. It's a gift. There's no way you would not charge for that, according to human wisdom. There's no way you wouldn't try to monetize that or try to get some, something for yourself for that. God offers in the gospel of Jesus Christ the free gift of salvation, the forgiveness of your sins, to be restored from all that's broken in your life, to live out his purposes and plan with the hope that all that you do is dignified and glorified by him every step and every breath. Why are we not telling people this? And why aren't people believing it? Well, it says something about sin. It says something about our lust for the human traditions and the elementary principles of the world. It's a sad thing, but a true thing. So, next time, we got to talk about the supremacy of Christ. We're going to. It's going to be amazing. That's the way that we are not taken captive ultimately, is to know Christ better, appreciate him for who he truly, truly, truly is. But boy, that is such a big statement in one phrase. It's not even the sentence. In him, the fullness, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. It's all you need today. I don't care what's going on in your life right now. I do care. Let me take that back. I care a lot. I'm sorry. I care a whole lot. That's not the right way to put it. I love you guys. I care a whole lot about what's going on in your life today. But I promise you that what you need most, so that you're not taken captive some something to assuage your hurting soul in the world. Shop therapy, or, veg out and binge watch something, or cry in a tub of ice cream, or self-harm, or, go look for a hookup, or go find drugs. All the empty, vain pursuits that you will turn to if you don't have Christ. As you get beat up by life, I promise you, I don't care what it is. Let me put it that way. I don't care what it is. In him, the fullness of deity, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. That answers it. But you got to have the wisdom to fear God. You got to have the wisdom to think about that. What does that mean for me and who I am? And that's tough. I get it. That's real tough. When the kids aren't listening, or, you get a ticket on your RV because it's parked there too long, or, you get frustrated by life and plans fall through, people get sick, people you love are hurting. It's so hard to remember that. That's what this is about then. Remember again, brothers and sisters, remember again, Jesus Christ. He has conquered sin and death. He loves you. He has ordained these things to happen to you, to draw you closer to him, to increase your love for God and for others. It's not without a purpose that you go through the things you go through. It is to experience greater and more and understand deeply and profoundly. In him, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. That's what we're running towards every day, every day.